you, the organizer, for having me here today. I'm going to take you from Germany to Japan. Okay. So this is a joint work with Morten Benesset from INSEAD, Vikas Merota from Alberta, and Jung Wok Chim from University in Kyoto. We look at a family firm in Japan. Very simple research questions. We try to understand the evolution of the family ownership and control structures. And we are trying to understand what factors explain the persistence of family firms or the family control or the family exit. Okay? And why do we start in Japan? Because it has some characteristic that I'm going to show to you in a moment that doesn't fit with the explanation that we learned from the literature. And in particular, when you come up to idea how we define family firms, because we saw a number of firms that the founding families still remain control as the top CEO and with little ownership. Okay, so this kind of thing is something unusual, I think. We think it's interesting to address. In particular, Japan is a country that doesn't allow dual class shares. Okay, and pyramids also very, very not common like in Korea or other Asian countries. So we built up this study from the excellent existing literature that look at the evolution of the ownership structure from IPO. And there are two sets of the literature, basically. The first set looking at the ownership by the insiders, the block of insiders, and second set look at family firm per se, an excellent one. And basically what the literature say is that, you know, insiders face the dilemma of having growth or maintaining family insider control. So when the firm have a lot of growth opportunities, what should one do? One could, when one that has a lot of money, one could put a lot of money in. Okay, but sometimes when one don't have enough money, what to do? You have to use external finance, and as an outcome, the ownership by block of insiders is going to be diluted. Okay, and this thing in particular occur faster in the country with good institutions. Okay. And when looking zoom into family firms, a few papers look at evolution of family firms per se, maybe because of lack of data, this is the hard work. And this is a US paper looking at the case, few cases, 84 cases that occur when the family sell the controlling block. And the controlling block here defined as 20% ownership stake. Okay? And the same thing, financial constraints force the family to exit. And the European data, excellent paper, look at two points in time, 1996 and 2006. And they define family firms as when the family own at least 25% of the shares. Okay? And they look at the data again 10 years later in 2006 and see whether the block is still there or not. And if not, they consider the ownership become diluted. Okay? And again, the financial factors, financial constraints explain the ownership dilution. Okay? This is interesting, but then when you're asking about it, how should we define really family control or exit? Okay, so far the literature talk about the ownership a lot. Okay, and many papers using a lot of cutoff. I think we don't understand much about the real world, and we just use ad hoc so that we can write good papers. Okay, so we use 25%, 20%, 10%, 5%. Okay, but then asking ourselves, how many percent really do we need? Okay, if you want to control corporation, how many percent do you need really? And we don't quite understand that. So I think one element also missing in terms of when we define family firms. So we don't quite look at the holding a top management position, at least the finance people. I think the management people might do something richer than us. And the second part, when we try to understand family exit or family control, we talk so much about family constraints. And one thing missing here is, what about the role of the families? And I think in this paper, we try to address this issue, okay? And motivation comes from looking at the real world. Japan, again, amazing Japan. Huh? You know Toyota, right? And when I ask my student, this is family firm or not? And my student would answer me that no. And I said, why not? Large firm. Look at the market cap, huge, right? This is number one and number two automobile industry in the world, a huge firm. And then the student said that it's professional. And then also it's a multinational company. It cannot be family firm. And Gen came to me that Toyota cannot be family firm. Okay, let's not define anything. Yes, let's the real world tell us story. Right? This is the president, the 11th president of Toyota. The name is Akio Toyoda. Toyota and Toyota is almost the same name. And actually, this is a family name. Okay, and it's clear there. Okay, it came from the founding family. Okay, let's look at a little bit about ownership. Okay, this is about 2014, but quite similar. The ownership is very stable. Top 10 largest shareholders. Any Toyota name in person there? Basically banks, a lot of them, right? And if you would guess, among top 10, this might be Toyota firm. This might be Toyota firm. Okay, it's actually are Toyota group firms. So now Toyota, we have a little bit like Korean chaebols. It's the Toyota group firms. Okay, and what about the family? Do they own anything at all? They do, but this is very large firm. The stock price also high, market cap high. How can you own? Let's go back here again. We're talking about market cap about at some point in time about 200 billion. Okay, can you own 10%? To control this corporation? It's a lot of money. No one has that much money. How would you do in order to control the firm? And this is the family, right? Okay. Ownership-wise, they own something. This is the father and son. He's a current president, and the father was a previous president. But the father has been on as an honorary chairman until recently. Okay, never retired. And they own something like 0.1%. Okay. However, if you look at management or something, if you read the Japanese magazines, it talk about the Toyota clans always behind the scene on decision making. And let me show you a little bit. When you look at the history, 100-year history of Toyota, going back, okay, there are 11 presidents, and 7 of them are from the Toyota clan, so up here. Everybody up here. And when, from the beginning, the 2 of them built Toyota Motors. The first one is adopted son-in-law, and he was a patriarch, and the second one, they built Toyota together. When Toyota were in trouble in 1950s, right, the 2 smart person came in to rescue. And this is long-term employees, salarymen, that have been helping the family come to rescue the firm. And at the time, the Toyota family didn't have mature son, and he was young. He was young, so they grew him up. And when he became more mature, he took the reins, and he has been with the family until he died recently at 100 years old. Okay, so the two of them died the same year, and he became in charge later, training in his nephew. And Shoichiro is the son of Kiichiro, right? So this is the next president, and he got his younger brother in, groomed his younger brother, because his son was also young. Eiji's son also too young. Okay, when they ran out of son because his brother got sick, these 3 salarymen came in. Salaryman meaning professional managers in Japanese, okay? The 3 of them came in, and by this time, almost at the end of the 2008, at this time, people thought that Toyota now it became professionalized, not family firm anymore, because none of them, they were very capable in taking Toyota to the world, okay? Now crisis hit, okay? Now what to do? And the family keep pushing, have my son in. And the salaryman said, not yet, wait until he become more mature at 50. And the crisis hit, and he came in, and they pushed him in. And why is that? What did he do? If you remember from the news, at the US Congress, he went there with tears, saying that, look, my name is everywhere, okay? And this is my firm, okay? My family has been building it, my name is everywhere. So we interpret this as, eponymous firm. It means what? It means commitment, it's reputation, it's trust that you build, okay? So he came in, and the family contributed something to the firm value. That's why the family could come back. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to come back by now, okay? Okay, so what to do with Toyota? This is family firm or not? Ownership-wise is very small, but the family never left the firm. Okay, what should we do with this kind of companies? And again, try to tell me this is exception. Okay, is it really exception or not? So we let the data tell us. Okay, and when I present this paper in Japan, the Japanese always kick me out from the room because how dare you are to tell that Toyota is family firm? Okay, let's see a little bit more. Next, and look at the ownership structure. So we collected the data from the previous paper that I worked on adopted son, and we collected the data from 1949, since the Second World War onwards, and see that the ownership structure top 10, family never owned anything from the beginning since the firm went IPO. And look at what you appear is Toyota Industry has been there. It's a group firm, okay? Family group firm has been holding the block about 5%. But sometimes they never appear as a largest shareholder. So this is change to my way of thinking about family firms. I always thought that before I started looking at a lot of data, I thought family would be the largest shareholder on the time. Not really. Okay, look at that. Only, yeah, right? And the ownership always small, about the same, 5% about that. Okay, who are they among these top 10 largest shareholders? Can you look at that? Have you seen any pattern there? Very interesting. What the data telling us, there are banks, insurance companies, right? Did you see any name that keep repeating every year, every 10 years even, right? Let's see, let me give Mitsui Bank, Mitsui Bank, Mitsui Bank, Mitsui Bank, everywhere, okay, for 50 years, okay? And Tokai Banks, if you look at, Tokai Bank is the bank at Nagoya, where the Toyota family has a headquarters. Okay, and the Tokai Bank has been with Toyota for a long time. This is 50 years consecutive shareholding. This is amazing, isn't it? We don't know this is by accident or by design or what. We don't quite understand this yet. We're going to call them these stable shareholders. But in the calculation, we don't use 20 years, okay? 50 years. Okay? This is just for fun to see the block. How big is this block of stable shareholders? Defining as the shareholder that hold Toyota share for at least for 50 years. Okay? Now we got a block, and so I just shared them. So we got a block now. Okay, to get family and friends now with a big block, 15.6%. I think Taebun Pekin in 1980 didn't understand this group ownership structure and tried to launch Hotei takeover in Japan and failed because the block, these little friends became a block and then support the family or the management team. But anyway, so this is one example. Let me introduce you another example. We thought it interesting. Suzuki Motor. This is where, yeah, he is now not too old, 89 years old. Listed firm, okay, and is the chairman, okay, and he has been controlling the group for a long time. I think he started become the CEO when his father stepped down in 1978, and until 2000, he was as president, stepped down to become the chairman, and come back again when the crisis hit, the global crisis hit, and keep control of the firm, I would say, as a president, and then groom his son. Okay, and now when his son became more mature, at 50-something for the Japanese standard, the son became the CEO, and he stayed on as the chairman until now. And he said that I'm not going to retire until at least 90. Okay, yeah. And what about to see this? He had been there for a long time, managed to push the son up to the top management position, which we can consider as control, can we? Okay, but then you look at ownership. Can you guess how many percent of the Suzuki family has been owning Suzuki Motor? How many percent? This is spectacular. Nothing among the top 10. Nothing listed among the top 10 are banks and insurance companies on there. No ownership among the large shareholder list. What is going on here, right? If you do the ownership cut-off, this is not family firm. Okay? But the family has never exited the firm. It's still there. Okay? Then the two of them still there, at least. Okay? Let me give you another example, Casio. Casio the watch. The family name is Casio. Yeah, it's similar, right? The same thing. So this is a firm that founded by 4 brothers and a father. And they took turn to become the CEO and chairman. And then the third son, he is now 90 years old. He's the chairman, okay? Yeah, and he has been controlling the firm for a long time, and almost recently he promoted his son, okay? So similar story, and this is more typical of family firms, that the families always control, keep the top management position, but then ownership, interestingly, this is, so we plot the ownership structure of these 3 firms. Casio has more than other people because they were founders, but over time it diluted, and now it's about 5%, right? So if you use a cutoff, I'm not sure whether this is a family firm or not, Okay, but because the family is still there, all right? And then Toyota flat, about 5%, and Suzuki Motor is always 0, okay, on this, in terms of ownership. What to do with these firms? Okay, so we want to experiment, yeah? So let's experiment with the data, broaden the definition of family firms, because I think we researchers try to do this and that for publication. By the way, this paper doesn't have any identification, okay? All right, so let's just try. Okay, so we introduce a few groups of family firms. The first group is typical family firm. Then the family has owners, and then a lot of ownership. And then the family also acts as a CEO, top management. All right, so we call them type 1. Introduce another type, what we call type 2, when the ownership diluted. Okay, family owns a little ownership, but still take control as a CEO, all right? And then we have another type, what we call type 3, and more professionalized. Family have ownership, okay, but now see outside non-family firm as a CEO, okay, right? So we introduce this type, type 4, when the family exit, no more ownership, really, no more ownership and no more management position, and this is a complete exit. All right, so we're going to see how many % of the Japanese firms are categorized based on this. And then we're going to try to understand how the firms work. The firm might be like this. Succession occur because we have this data set, we have 50 years data. So we could see when the family succession occur. When some of the firms walk around here, never walk out to become different type, or maintain within the family. Okay, and some family, the firm walk to type 2. Okay, we're going to see how many % like that, to type 3 and complete exit, okay, on the firm. The 11 type complete exit, how many % of this? And we try to understand the determinants of that. And we build up from the existing literature that's talking about ownership dilution. It's based on financial constraints. Okay, we build on that. And we add up into this is we borrow a concept from the strategy people talking about the role of resources. If the family have a lot of resources, then very easy to maintain control, right? Meaning that when you contribute to the firm value, that's why the firm still needs you. Otherwise, either you are kicked out or when bankruptcy kick you out, okay? And now if the family has, when the firms don't have financial constraint and have strong family assets, the firm will remain as type 1. Okay, so when the family become type 2, and this when the financial constraint come in and explain it. Type 3, when the family try to professionalize, maybe when the family really need professional to help them manage the firm. Okay, maybe because the performance is bad, or maybe because they have a lot of investment opportunity, high growth firms. Okay, but then the family have to make sure that they can control salaryman CEO. Okay, maybe because of ownership that they could vote, maybe they have the board member to be there in order to control the type 3 professionalization. But once they lose, when the firm faces a lot of family constraint. When the firm faces a lot of financial constraint, at the same time, when the family cannot contribute anything to the firm value, then you're going to see them exit. Okay? And we try to proxy this, okay? But of course not perfect, because it's very, very difficult to proxy the family asset. So let's experiment. So we use first the family ownership. Okay? You need the ownership for sure, because this means incentives and voting rights. Okay? And second, whether the family have a pool of talents or not, their own sons. Okay? And we try to proxy smart son by using the term elite sons. Okay? Son, no daughters. Okay? For the Japanese world, no daughters. Yeah? So those who went to top schools, okay, they follow the literature. And then we are trying to see salarymen, whether they have smart salarymen on board or not. Okay? And the next proxy is about family reputation. We use eponymous firm for the literature again. And then the third, the last proxy is maybe stable share ownership. Proxy is something about business networks. But we don't quite understand this much yet. Okay, so we leave the question mark over there. Okay, try to understand this variable because we think it's unique. Okay, here. So the data, okay? I'm going to walk through you to the result quickly. So data collected from my previous paper from 1949 till now. So we have long-term data. Basically, the firms, any listed firm in any exchanges in Japan are included in this sample size. A lot of hand-collected data there because we have to define family, non-family with last name, with all kinds of things, a lot of work over there. And then you could see this. And now ownership, very interestingly, we calculate family ownership, okay? And I think it is interesting. We saw the mean and median here. The dilution of family ownership occurred, we think it's slow. Right? But this is a developed country, Japan. Why do you see the family ownership diluted 10 years, 5%, and remain 5%? Okay, did not disappear to zero. Okay, not too fast. Okay, I don't have time to show you everything, so let me pick something that I think is interesting. Now, so we categorize the firms. Okay, after IPO. Now we have 45 years from 1960s, I think. So we have type 1, type 2, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, okay? And now we experiment by using 20% cutoff to define family ownership or not. Shockingly to us, type 2 firms, which is unusual firm, when the family have small, so-called small ownership, meaning that less than 20%, but the family is the CEO. That's a lot. Too lot. And if we don't use this definition at all, these are going to be non-family firms, all right? Former family firms that became non-family firms. So you're going to see family exit longer. But then if we allow top management, then they maintain as a family firms, and there's a lot of them. And again, some type 3, okay? And this is interestingly, after so many years of IPO, only 50% of the family firms become non-family firms. Okay, and we think that in resilience, family firms don't die after the 3 generations, right? I think we got the 3 generation syndrome, but I think the Japanese family firms die harder. Okay, now what about if we try with the 5% ownership structure? Now you see things change a little bit. You see more of type 1, right? And then type 2 still quite a bit, 10%. Okay, and type 3 and type 4 after IPOs. So this is the second type is something that amazing, and don't quite understand them much here yet. What about calendar year? Now we put in on listed firms in Japan. Now we allow non-family firms to come in here, and you could see this is calendar year. By 2000, about 20% are type 1. And about 10% are type 2. And then you see former family firms quite a bit up there, but not a lot. Yeah, so you could see that about 20% of the family firms, former family firms, of family firms that die, and then about 40% are non-family firms. Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna, if you use 5% cut off, of course you get to see more of type 1. Okay, as I said earlier. Okay. Almost run out of time.
3 minutes.
Oh, then I'm going to, okay, just with the data. So we are curious about them. If the firm started from type 1, okay, what happened to them after so many years? Really rare that type 1 is going to walk to type 4. Okay, I think this is 18 cases among lots of them. Really rare to see that. Most of them transfer, either become type 1 themselves, but if they ever walk from type 1, they become type 3, 80% of them, and some become type 2. Okay? Now, if you start from type 2, remember, when you don't have ownership, what happened to you? Is it easy to transfer to the children? Harder, right? You see almost all of them become type 4. So this is on the way of exit, right? Yeah? It's difficult to go back to become other type, die, dead. Okay? Now, if you start from type 3, 60% walk back to become type 1. This is a Toyota case. We are from salaryman back to the family, and some of them walk to become type 4, exit. Okay? So we are trying to run regression, but we have time. So lots of characteristics, just to try to understand whether the 4 types have different characteristics, and you could see that they're different. Interestingly, just to point you a little bit, family ownership varies. Type 2, almost nothing. The mean is almost 0 there. And no ownership, but control. Okay, and we don't have time to point too much, but they're distinctly different. Now we run regression quickly. So this is the type 1, type 2, type 3 logistic model, probability of exit to become type 4. Okay, so we introduced 2 sets of variables. This one a finance variable, just to follow the literature. And model 2, we introduce family factors. And model 3, we dump everything in. Okay? And you could see that family factor matters a lot. R squared increased from 0.7 to 13. Okay? Yeah? And then this is following the literature a little bit. You see that firms that have bad performance exit, right? So that makes sense. Leverage kick out the firm as well. A lot of that kick you out. But what this, the age, this is surprising. The older the firms are, the more likely you maintain family firms. And this is the opposite to what we know from the literature. Okay. And family factors coming in as expected. Okay. When you have a lot of ownership, it's very less likely that the firm going to exit. And the family legacy matter, and family pool of talents also matter. Okay? Now, we are curious about, what about the firm walking from type 1 to type 2? So basically, this is about ownership dilution, right? And financial factors should come in a lot, and exactly that's what we saw here. Size coming a little bit, leverage come in when the firm issue more equity, you become diluted. And then the family factor become less important, except when the family have ownership. Okay, yeah. And the last slide, this is the determinant of professionalization. Okay, you could see that performance come in. When the firm have bad performance, then you use professionalize to help you. And then when the firm have a high growth firm, and then you see professionalization occur. And of course, ownership come in so that the family can vote, okay, to protect their interests. And the family on board also matter. Okay. Sorry, I'm running out of time, so let me conclude quickly. So we think we learned something interesting and define control. Per se, using ownership alone might not be perfect. Maybe we want to introduce a management in here as well when making decisions. And then family asset also important in terms of determinant of exit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me to discuss this paper. I'm not in the area. This was totally new. This was very interesting read for me. I learned a lot, and so I'm going to spend a little bit of time, just reviewing the main facts. There's a lot of stuff in this paper, here's what I learned. So the paper talks about two main questions, all right? So one is, why is there share dilution after firm's IPO? This question has been addressed in the literature before. It's in the context of Japanese firms. They have a long sample to look at, so there's something interesting to address here. And so once you see dilution, then the other question is, is there still control being maintained despite the dilution? Okay, so that's a separate question that arises in the paper. The answer in the literature to the first question has been, why do you see dilution? Well, some papers, including René Stult's stuff, said basically that if you need to finance expansion, if you have growth and you need resources, and the capital market is well functioning, then that's a good way to tap into those resources. You tap into those resources, then it turns out naturally you're going to dilute a little bit of your claim on the firm. René Stult's paper actually, I think, points out to another form of dilution, which is insider ownership selling. Okay, this is nothing to do about the expansion of the firm. It's just, I want to sell to realize some cash, maybe reduce idiosyncratic risk, whatever. And my reading from René's paper is that it actually seems like, it's almost like half and half, at least for that paper. So anyway, financial factors matter. That's kind of what the literature has said. And what this paper brings in that's new, I think, is, first of all, the paper identifies a similar pattern for Japanese family-owned firms. But then it says that, family assets seem to slow down this dilution. So if there are these intangible family assets, you kind of didn't call them intangible, but I think the intangible word shows up everywhere in the paper. If you have these intangible family assets, which, you don't quite know what they are, but, maybe the name of the firm is the name of the family, is one of those assets, then you tend to see a little bit of a slowdown of dilution, which I thought was a really interesting fact. Okay, so how is control maintained? Well, in many countries, the way that you maintain control is through a strong equity ownership. So even though you're diluting the equity ownership on the firm, you have other ways, not direct ways of owning the firm, but indirect ways of owning the firm through pyramidal ownerships, dual class shares, or cross ownerships. And what Yupana and the co-authors talk about is that this basically, dual class shares are not permitted in Japan, so that's not a possibility of owning the firm through that method. And pyramidal structures are rare, and so that leaves us with cross ownership, which there is some, and they're taking that into account. So, but even with cross ownership, you see a decline you see significant share dilution as was shown just a while ago. Okay, so how do you maintain if you don't have this direct or indirect equity ownership? So the paper talks about these intangible family assets that they still allow you to keep control. All right, and I think the one thing that's very interesting is that once you take into account family, these intangible assets, this ability of the firm to basically to keep top management, even though you don't have significant share ownership. The total size of family-controlled firms in Japan expands significantly, right? So they, it has been a little bit under the radar because people seem to have, not looked into these firms, and so I think it's a significant thing that they've shown us. An very interesting observation. And then finally, they talk about this family control being much more long-lasting than previously thought. So let me just show you this in pictures. You've seen this just now, but I'm going to go over them again. So this is imagine you're at an IPO stage. This is the IPO year, and then you trace what happens to ownership following the IPO year. Okay, that goes 50 years after the IPO, and then so this is 100%. This is conditioning on being a family firm. What happens afterwards? So firms that are non-family firms, they're not in here. They're going to show up in the next graph that I'll show you. So this is conditional on being a family firm at the IPO day. What happens subsequently, and so you see that type 1 firms. These are the traditional family-owned firms. You have a strong equity ownership, and you hold the top management job. Okay. Then type 3 firms you have a strong equity position, but you have a professional manager. Right. The novel thing here is these type 2 firms. Type 2 firms they're these firms where your equity ownership is really low. In this case, it's less than 5%, but you still have the top management job. Okay, you have the CEO or the president of the company. Right? And so what you see here is that even though the type 1 firms, the traditional family-owned firms, are significantly declining, and after 50 years they're about just a little over 10%. There's a significant number of these firms, of these other family-owned firms that the paper points to, and brings them to the radar. That despite the fact that they're not held significantly, the Cashios of the world, they're not or Suzuki's of the world, they're not held significantly by the family. The family owns the top job. Okay. So that's I think the surprising thing is this significant number of firms that are type 2 firms. And if you look at in calendar time, what you have is so in calendar time now, what they do is they put all the firms together, not just the firms that are that start off as family firms. So these are the dark blue ones. They're the non-family firms, and you see they're shrinking over time. Okay. The type 1 firms, remember, these are the traditional equity ownership type firms. Strong equity share ownership plus top management job. Okay, they're fairly stable at about 30% of the firms. This is not market cap; it's just number of firms. Fairly stable at about 30% of the firms in the Japanese stock market. The type 2 firms, they don't show up here as a significant bunch. These are kind of the novel type of firms here. I've picked the graph that is a little bit more conservative. If you use the graph that has an equity ownership of that requires an equity ownership of 20% or more to be called a family-owned firm, then this graph looks a little bit better. But still, still you have a significant bunch of these type 2 firms. Firms that, you don't have much of an equity ownership, and yet you're able to place the family member at the top job. Okay. So one interesting thing about this is that you can look at transitions. You can look at firms that move from one to the other and things like that. And so if you look at firms that move out of type 1, okay, the very old traditional type of family-owned firms, those firms that move out of type 1, about 2/3 move to type 3, meaning you still own a lot of equity ownership on the firm, you choose to delegate on a professional manager. Okay, so about 2/3 of the firms that move, they move to type 3, and there's 1/3 of firms that move to type 2. That is, you sell your equity ownership, but you're able to keep the family member in the top job, right? The other interesting thing here is that if you look at firms that move out of type 3, so type 3 is, high equity ownership of the family, but a professional manager. The firms that move out of type 3, a lot of them actually move back to type 1. You own the firm. You control a big chunk of the equity of the firm. You chose to have a professional manager. Now you say, well, I want to go back to having a family member run the firm. And a lot of them choose to do that. Okay, so about 45% of the firms transitioning out of type 3, they go back to type 1. The others that transition out of type 3, they go to being an ex-family firm. They go to this yellow band over here. And then the type 2 firms, if you've moved to type 2, meaning if you're now sold a lot of equity, okay, but for some reason we're able to keep the top management job, then when you move out of those, you move out to ex-family, right? There's no way that you're going to capture control ever again. Okay, that's an absorption point for you. All right, so paper offers a bunch of other facts. It's really a treasure chest of findings. Kind of hard to go over all of those facts together. It's just a list, small list of those facts, some of which I've already addressed. So family ownership is high if the firm is profitable, and if the firm did not have to go to the equity market before. Not very surprisingly, this is also part of what's already in the literature. Family ownership is high, family assets are high. Firms move to professional management while maintaining high ownership if family member is on the board. But surprisingly to me, not if family member is from elite school. I don't know why that's the case. But anyway. So not much explains why firms move to low ownership with control. So this I found a little bit disappointing because, you're talking about this special class of family-owned firms that they kind of unearth. They bring them back, to the radar. But there's nothing really that they, of the determinants that they can point to that say, here's why these firms exist. Here's why they're able to maintain top management control, right? So I like the fact that they've unearthed these firms, but it's somewhat disappointing that not much can be said about them. Anyway, so what are my comments? All right, so what are these intangible family assets? Okay, these are the proxies that they use for intangible family assets. So first is eponym, right? So you have a firm whose name is related or the family name itself. Okay, it's about 1/3 of the sample is these eponym firms. Okay, then you have whether a family member is part of the board. That's another intangible family asset, or that a family member is part of the board and has an elite education from an elite university. Okay, that's another family asset. And then you have the stable ownership variable that describes kind of the turnover on the top 10 shareholders of the firm, looking back in the last 5 consecutive years. So I may have had not the last version of the paper, but anyway, so these are the variables that they use to describe intangible family assets. Let me talk a little bit about these things. So how does one choose between share ownership versus other family assets? So imagine my game plan is I want to control the firm, right? And I can control the firm either because I own a lot of equity on the firm or because I have these family assets, right? Are they substitutes, complements? Can I achieve the same thing with both of these? So I think they're not substitutes. The paper seems to suggest that they're somehow substitutes, that you can get control either way. I don't think there's substitutes. Certainly, if you own a lot of share ownership on a firm, you have a lot of idiosyncratic risk on that firm, okay? And so if you own a lot of intangible family assets, you don't necessarily have a lot of idiosyncratic risk associated with the firm. Certainly not financial idiosyncratic risk. You may have human capital idiosyncratic risk, but not financial. So they don't seem substitutes, although they seem, according to the paper, to be able to deliver the ability to control the firm. So if that's the case, then why doesn't everybody adopt type 2 firm, right? So if I get to choose, I say, well, if I can get control with less exposure to idiosyncratic risk, then I don't care about that. I'll just sell my share ownership, invest, in a diversified portfolio, and then still have control, still maintain control. So why doesn't everybody do that? I think the answer, well, maybe one answer is that, as I was mentioning here, if you're a type 3 firm, if you're a type 1 firm, meaning the traditional equity stuff, you can move to professional management, you can move over here, and you can move back to type 1 firm, right? So control is kind of guaranteed, and you have an option to delegate control to somebody else. But that option means that also you can just take that out and regain control to the family member. So that's an important value of having a strong equity ownership that you do not have if you're a type 2 firm. If you're a type 2 firm, if you're here and you exit, then you're going to exit up there to not having control of any sort, right? So it seems like one benefit of having a strong equity ownership is that you actually guarantee control, which you don't if you just have these intangible family assets. That's, I think, an important distinguishing feature between the two. Another question on these, still on my comment one, what are these intangible family assets? Are these just firm fixed effects? Okay, and the regressions that were shown do not have firm fixed effects. Okay, and I think part of the reason is because one of the variables is eponym variable, and if you put a firm fixed effect, the eponym variable is going to drop. But I think it would be interesting to just maybe drop that variable, put the firm fixed effect, and then see if the other variables that describe these intangible family assets actually describe any variation, significant variation, that explains dilution and control of the firm. So I think that's an important thing to do. And then the question remains, what gives rise to variation in intangible family assets? Okay, so to me, if you have the top management job, that's an intangible family asset. I don't know how you got there, but that's already an intangible family asset. But it turns out that they're putting that on the left-hand side of the regression, if you will, right? So you're explaining having someone at the board. Sorry, you're explaining the top management job by having someone at the board, right? But I could very easily say that the reason why there's someone at the board is because I'm able to put someone at the top job, right? And so, I don't know exactly what's an intangible family asset. What is it that I'm trying to explain here? It seems like I'm trying to explain the very thing that I'm using to explain that. So, maybe thinking about other proxies for that, or maybe looking at a shock, right? So if you have this is where the comments become a little bit, sad. But look at someone that dies, and it's decent, right? It's somewhere in Japan, so we're not as attached being in Germany. But anyway, so look at someone that dies, right? Top manager or a board member, and try to infer some causality there to see if anything happens to these firm types. That's where I would go, because otherwise you can't really tell. You have family assets on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the regressions. Okay, so the paper says that these family assets help preserve family control. So in the first regressions that they run, they say, well, how do you explain dilution over time? Well, dilution over time basically is explained by the need to expand the firm, right? So this is what's been known already in the literature. But they say that, but if you have these family assets, then dilution slows down. Okay, so there's a way to maintain control. But then the problem is that when you look at the firms that move from type 1 to type 2, meaning these firms are you move from high ownership and top management job to low ownership and top management job. So you basically sell the firm, but somehow manage to keep the top management job. So when you look at these transitions, you don't find any explanatory power based on family assets. And this is a little bit weird, because you'd expect that no one would move to type 2 firm if I wasn't sure that I had the family assets needed to maintain control. Right? So there's a little bit of a disconnect here. And it could be that it's a lack of power. They only have 233 observations of these moves, of these transitions. So it could be. But it could be that these proxies for family assets are not really capturing or not enough, the ability to retain control. So maybe look at other things. Or it could also be, and I think this is probably more of the reason, that there really are two types of firms over here. There are firms that start their sample being type 2 firms, and there's some firms that during the period of their study move to type 2 firms. And these kinds of firms, I think they're different. And so maybe that's something to look into. All right, what about other determinants of ownership? So I went back to the paper by Elwige, Perinsky, and Stultz. You know, they have a very comprehensive list of potential determinants of ownership. One of which I think, you know, particularly significant is agency. That's omitted in this paper. I think you should look into that kind of stuff. There's one place in the paper, page 5, where it talks about governance structures, or at least in my version talked about governance. I don't know if in the new version it still does, but to me it felt like, you know, it was a misplaced comment or something because it only showed up there. But it cannot be a misplaced comment, right? I mean, a paper about dilution of ownership has to talk about agency. The point that you know, René does in his paper, he talks about, says, you know, look, maybe what's happening is maybe agency costs become, you know, less important over time or easier to manage over time. And so maybe you can, that's why you can dilute the firm a little bit more. And they use, you know, proxies like hard assets, property, plant, and equipment to total assets. And they also use turnover of the firm in the stock market as a way to describe the ability of a, you know, takeover contest to start. So those kinds of things I think would be, you know, interesting to look at. There's other variables not related to agency. They're here in this bullet point. You know, look at past and contemporaneous returns of the firm, for example. Anyway, so I was surprised also. Why is there nothing about the presence of, you know, potentially passive institutional shareholders? This stable ownership variable seems to capture a little bit that, but the stable ownership variable can potentially also capture the firm's own family equity ownership. And so we're using the firm's family equity ownership as to explain the family equity ownership. And so I would remove the family component part of the stable ownership variable when describing that. And then finally, what, you know, with respect to agency frictions consideration, what's the role of other governance things like, you know, staggered boards or independent boards and things like that. So I would imagine, you know, putting that in the regression would be important. My final comment is what's in a name? What makes the name specific? What makes the name special here? Because I think that, you know, there's some emphasis in the presentation, certainly in the you know, case studies that they look at, which you kind of talked about earlier on. There's some emphasis on the name of the firm, right? So I saw the movie The Founder recently, and there they, you know, they portray the choice of the name as Ray Kroc just liked the name McDonald's. Just said, no, this is a name that, you know, appeals to everybody. And so, so why did he keep the name? Well, I mean, he could have replicated the business as is, because he knew the formula of the business. He knew everything. He could have replicated. He wanted to buy out the owners, according to the movie. He wanted to buy out the owners because he liked the name of the company. That's why, at least that's what it says. So, so he thought of the name itself as an asset, okay? But clearly that asset would not be a family asset, because no McDonald's shareholder today would think of appointing a descendant of one of the McDonald's brothers as a CEO just because they share the name, okay? So one question is this you know, a Japan thing? Perhaps because of the strong culture of harmony and strong intergenerational family ties? Perhaps. But what about the US? So I looked very briefly at S&P 500 firms, founders that are also CEOs of firms in the US, and this is for 2014. There's only 3 firms whose the founder is a CEO, and the firm name shares the name of the founder. So Kinder Morgan, Ralph Lauren, and Wynn Resorts. Maybe SanDisk, if San comes from Sanjay, I don't know. Maybe it does, but I have no idea. And maybe L Brands, if Leslie Herbert, the L comes from that, but I don't know if you qualify that as an eponym. But anyways, 3 are obvious. Of these 3, only one of them, only Ralph Lauren, I could tell that as a very low equity ownership. So I mean, there are some cases in the US that would be the type 2 firms that they talk about. So I mean, I would encourage them to look at, you know, maybe in another paper on these kinds of things, and to see for the US, and to see if being an eponym is actually relevant for the US at all. I also read on the internet, I was Googling name of company with a family name, and there was reports of why shouldn't you pick a company name with, why wouldn't you pick a company name with a family name? Why wouldn't you do that? And so anyway, but a lot of people seem to do that. I mean, at least 4 over here seem to do that. All right, so small peakings, I'll pass that. So overall, I think very interesting paper. There's this new observation that I found really interesting, that family control without significant ownership seems to be prevalent in Japan. This new evidence gives rise to a bunch of interesting observations regarding the value of these intangible family assets. I had some questions on the particular proxies that are used in endogeneity issues. And the paper develops results on the role of family assets, the traditional share ownership versus these intangible family assets in explaining control and ownership of family firms in Japan. Thank you.
We just let me address a few points. I think about why family ownership and family asset. How should we think about this? We not fully understand this much, but we think that ideally, if you are family firms, and my family also family firm, we would really like to own a lot of ownership stake, because ownership stake mean what? Mean voting rights, right? That help you control the firm. But then when you have a lot of growth opportunities and you want to grow, what is the choice? The choice of maintaining control and not growing, that's one choice, right? And stay smaller. Or you grow and you get ownership diluted. I'm not talking about selling here. I didn't use the word selling, and I think most of Japanese firms, more of ownership dilution more than selling. Or a few firms that exited because of bankruptcy, but most of them more of the ownership dilution. And then some firms somehow manage to control a firm. That's what we think. We don't quite fully understand yet. Try to control the firm by holding some kind of key asset that the firm needs you. And if you go back to the literature on how can one control corporations, and I think Singalis has a paper a while ago talking about one can control corporation if one control the critical asset of the firm, right? And example would be Steve Jobs. That I think I didn't mention about this, that motivated us as well. How could he control Apple, which is huge, and his ownership is tiny? Right? Because he owns all kinds of things, ideas, leadership, and etc. You name it, it's him, right? And that part that we couldn't proxy, fully proxy here, okay, limited data. Okay, one maybe a little bit more thing about in the governance variable, independent directors, no such a thing in Japan, right? They name it independent directors. And you're talking about investor activism, no such a thing in Japan either. Yes, and another point about agency problem, we have to think a little bit about that, but this is family firms, with different from Renee's paper, that is about the typical agency problem, but here is family firm, different kind of agency problem, but of course we will think about it. Okay, I think can I get more?
Okay, so maybe shall I get my first response to Japan?
Yes.
So then
Shall I collect a few things and then?
Okay, maybe
I would like to hear more.
Okay. Thank you for the very interesting paper regarding my country. And the first, let me politely point out that our paper, 2016, still at the SSRN, raised the same issue, that the second point, that family control without significant ownership is prevalent in Japan. Why it is? And we raised our own hypothesis. Just one thing. And my question on your paper is, although your hypothesis to solve that issue, that the family intangible asset is important with the financial matters. I share the same feeling, but the major family intangible asset you says is the stable ownership. So in Japan, stable ownership means that the cross shareholding, and it's all over. Not only family farm, but also for salarymen run farms. And that is now symbolic for their entrenchment efforts. So how you can distinguish between that wonderful family intangible assets or the business network and the families has a strong will to keep their control, the strong will of entrenchment. So it's hard to distinguish for me. Thank you.
On the theory of why what enables type 2 that we've been discussing, you were mentioning that maybe you have assets, but the assets of the type you have vision, type, and leadership, those are important, but you wouldn't expect them to pass from one generation to another unless the genes do something that most of us, sometimes looking at our own children or our friends' children, we don't see it working so then so with other people's children, it doesn't always work. But another possibility is, you were mentioning it in Japan, but if you look at the US, you don't see it passing its heel, but you see startlingly large incidents of people who are governors after their parent or the governor or the senator or something, 3 generations, and they are members of the House of Representatives. I think that there was a president and was father of the president. And that wasn't the case of ownership, right? It's in all the countries, but they still managed to get. So the question is, what did they do? And the alternative hypothesis might be that there is some human family capital. That's when you grow up in the family, you have some network of connections that gives you an advantage in the next round. And the connections might be either with institutional investors, and they're all coming to dinner when you are young and then staying with you, or with suppliers and other partners. That hypothesis you might be able to test if you see that this is more likely to happen in industries where that kind of network, where not some kind of soft connection might be more important.
Thank you. Very nice.
There's a little caution about defining control as having a family member in a top position and drawing a contrast between that and quote-unquote professional management, because it implies that the firm would be run differently under professional managers. But as you know, professional managers can rise within the firm almost exclusively. There is no liquid market for top managers, and there's very little performance-based compensation in Japan. So what matters is firm-specific knowledge, whether that's a family member or a quote-unquote professional manager. So I think it would take to look at whether these firms are run differently. I suspect the answer is no, because of the state of shareholding, capacity of shareholders. I'm doubtful that we see major changes in how these firms are actually run as a previous successor of top management.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
I have 2 points. One is related to the family name. In the United States, the dual-class companies, basically, if you look at the determinants of being a dual-class company, Gomper said will find that having the family name in the firm name is one of the major determinants. This might basically help. The second thing is in the Japan, as I understand, I've seen a paper that was saying that there's these adopted sons.
It's my paper.
Yes. And, yes. And I was wondering, here, do you count adopted sons as the family or as the executive? Or can you use them as a
family? For the Japanese definition, adopted son of family.
Because what I was thinking is, if
Yeah.
I'm planning to adopt Cook.
Thank you. Excellent.
And I think it's fascinating, and the question about how this is maintained? You say in the paper that there's no dual class, okay, that's a legal rule. You also say there are no pyramids, but there not being any pyramids, that seems endogenous. So the question is, could you have a pyramid? Also, if you don't have a shareholder block, could you have a hostile takeover? I mean, there are ways in how this could unravel, and I think I've heard enough from the Japan experts that I can imagine why these things might not be possible, especially the second one, but it would be good to tell us why. And that all goes in the direction of how is this possible in Japan? After all, the dynamics you're describing, in principle, I think at the level where you talk about it, they should apply in other countries as well. And one question I had for you was whether you know whether these named companies, Toyota, Mitsubishi, Nissan, I think they're all family names. Anecdotally, it seems like these family names are very common for companies in Japan in a way that anecdotally I don't think they are in everywhere else. It would be good to know if that's part of the story.
There is actually the AER paper recently talking about economic crime in the US. American Economic Review talking about similar thing. I didn't quote in the paper. We quote that, but they did look at the US crime.
Trying to shed some light on why this is happening. You might want to exploit the voting patterns. I mean, I take it that these family CEOs have to be voted into their office by the chair of the meeting, meaning that you could probably infer something from the voting patterns if it's the same people. So going along Lucian's lines, so if it's really a closely knit circle of social caste or whatever, that goes together, then you should see that in the voting pattern. That might be a way.
You mean voting pattern at the AGM?
Yes, exactly. So who votes for them? So if you can really see what is happening, if the professional managers are voted for by different agents.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. I'm trying to figure out if there's some other way of trying to find what the underlying connections are here. Wondering if any of the family members are on the boards of any of the major shareholders, or whether the initial family firm holds some substantial shares in one or more of their major shareholders, or that are some of the major shareholders of the firm also major suppliers, and so continuing those relationships may be safer if they stay with the family as owners.
Yeah, first, just an excellent, fascinating paper. I guess one observation which I find terrific in your paper, which relates to other things, is the diversity that you point out with different types of family firms, which I think with institutional investors now, there's so much going on drilling down and then finding the incentives at the end of the day. But the question, and I guess this relates to some of the earlier questions as to why you have the type 2s in Japan. I think, and things have been said about stable shareholding and whatnot, but when you have a situation where the market in Japan and the only other equivalents in terms of the level of dispersion is the US and the UK, but it's a different, of course, makeup with stable shareholdings, you would think in other markets where you have another big shareholder, you're not going to likely have the opportunity for this to arise, meaning that when you have a group of very small, stable shareholders, and none of them really have a big casting weight, maybe it opens up the opportunity to have a person with reputational or these intangible values come in and sort of shift the balance, right? Whereas if I take a Singapore context where you maybe have one very big large shareholder and it transfers to another very big large shareholder, then I would think it would be difficult to rely on these intangible assets to maintain that sort of control. So I think it does have something to do with the market, the widely dispersed and sort of the collective action costs among the others that allow this sort of tie-breaking function. And I think if you look at the Toyota example, when Toyota came in the crisis with sudden acceleration, that seemed to probably be maybe what was going on.
Okay, thank you. Good.
And so if you don't mind having. Is it okay to extend? It's already, but I think it's, yeah, very well.
The way the paper is framed raises an interesting question, because it characterizing it as of the family CEO maintaining as control implies that the CEO has the ability to keep that if other people don't like it. And the other characterization is the CEO is tolerated because there is control elsewhere, but there are reasons for letting them stay. The quick look I saw on the slide with share ownership, it looked like a lot of the 3% holdings, which added up to some non-insignificant amount, they look like banks. Yes. And I would be curious for these, of those shareholders, how many of them you have characterized as having a main bank relationship? And then if that's the case, then main banks kicking out the family affects not just that relationship, but the main bank's relationship with other families. And in turn, if we look at the other banks, the main bank didn't provide all the financing. It was a group of banks, convoy or whatever the term was, so that the banks have their own interest in maintaining their relationship. The second is, I recall a paper meetings that Steve Kaplan wrote, in which he looked at CEO turnover in Japanese companies. And the tension was between, is Japan really different, sort of Professor Hakanda's view of the world, or is it really kind of the same once you look behind the curtain? And Kaplan's claim that basically Japanese CEOs turned over in relationship to business exigencies, pretty much like every place else. So I didn't see I didn't have time to go back to see whether there was a way to keep the CEO, the family CEO disappearing for some reason, to some performance incentive with respect to the company. And the last comment was, so we got all the charts ran 50 years, which meant that they weren't parallel. So we can identify circumstances in which bank holdings dropped significantly because of the decrease in capital markets. And we began to see the decrease, or substantial decrease in cross holdings, which uncomplicated some of the relationships. And it would just be useful to see the timing of those changes to significant changes in Japanese business practices and organizations.
Thank you.
If you want to be very brief.
I don't want to steal time. I'll ask.
Okay, all right. Okay, so thank you so much,
Thank
Ipana.
you so much.